The envelope was bound in black wax, and it carried the smell of something Kiera Mann had never been allowed to touch. Consequence. "You have been summoned, Miss Mann," said Mrs. Dorothea Slane, her voice clipped as the frost crawled through the windows of street. "Catherine's orphanage. A duke waits in the chapel." The words struck like blasphemy. Dukes did not enter orphanages. They built them to ease their consciences, signed checks from a distance, and never looked at the faces their charity kept alive. Every girl in the laundry room froze mid-stitch. The fire seemed to dim. 23 years Kiera had folded linens in this place, scrubbed floors until her knuckles bled, and learned to make herself small enough that cruelty would pass over her like weather. Now a duke had crossed the threshold, and the air tasted like ruin. Mrs. Slane's fingers tightened around the envelope as if it were a coin. Her eyes flicked toward the other girls with a warning that needed no words. This will not end cleanly. Kiera wiped her hands on her apron, but the damp would not leave. She followed Mrs. Slane through the narrow corridor, where the walls leaned inward and the cold lived in the stone itself. Behind her, whispers rose and died like prayers no one believed in. The chapel doors opened with a groan that sounded too much like judgment. Candlelight flickered against stone. The nave stretched long and hollow, and at the far end, near the altar rail, stood a man who did not belong to places like this. Dominic Thornbridge, Duke of Calderwyn. Tall, austere, eyes the colour of stormwater. He wore black gloves and a coat cut with the kind of precision that made even stillness look like power. He did not move when she entered. He simply watched, and the weight of that gaze made her spine straighten without permission. "Miss Kiera Mann," he said quietly, and her name sounded different in his mouth. Not a number on a ledger, not a mistake, a name. Mrs. Slane stepped forward too quickly, her voice drenched in false warmth. "Your Grace, she is presentable, I assure you. We have raised her with discipline and—" "Leave us," Dominic said. The command was soft, but it severed the room in half. Mrs. Slane's smile cracked at the edges. She curtsied and retreated, but her eyes lingered on the envelope in Dominic's hand like a dog watching meat. The door closed. Kiera stood alone with the Duke, and the silence behaved like a third presence. "Do you know why I am here?" Dominic asked. "No, Your Grace. The late Lord Benedict Hawthorne, Earl of Greyford, left instructions in his will." He paused, and the pause felt deliberate. "Instructions regarding you." Her breath caught. The name meant nothing to her, but titles always carried weight even when they carried lies. Dominic stepped closer, and she noticed the envelope bore a crest she had seen only on charity baskets delivered twice a year. Black wax, a hawk in flight. Greyford. "Lord Benedict was your father," Dominic said, and the chapel seemed to tilt. Kiera opened her mouth, but no sound came. Her father. A lie. A trick. Something worse. "Your mother was Mary Ellison." Dominic continued, his voice measured, controlled. "She served as governess at Greyford Hall. When you were born, the Earl arranged payment to this orphanage. Not charity. Silence." The word silence landed like a stone in water, rippling outward until it touched every memory she had ever been told about herself. Unwanted. Unnamed. A mistake wrapped in rags and left to survive on the kindness of strangers who had none to give. "Why now?" Kiera asked, and her voice was steadier than she expected. "If he knew where I was, why did he never come?" Dominic's expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "He died with regret. And an instruction. Find her. Give her a life. And do not let society devour her." "And you agreed to this?" "I gave my word." She wanted to laugh, but the sound would have broken something inside her. "Dukes do not keep promises to orphans." "I do." The certainty in his tone was worse than cruelty. It demanded belief. Dominic opened the envelope and withdrew a single document. "This is the will. It grants you an inheritance protected from the Earl's legitimate heirs. Land, rents, investments. Enough to live independently." Her pulse hammered. Independence. The word tasted like something she had only read in stolen books. "But," Dominic continued, and the word dropped like a blade, "the law requires a guardian until you reach 25 years or marry. That guardian has been named." "Who?" "Me." The chapel pressed inward. "A duke. A guardian. A cage built from nobility instead of stone." "I do not need a keeper," Kiera said. "No. Dominic replied, his gaze holding hers. You need a shield. Society will call you imposter, liar, opportunist. They will dismantle your name before you learn to speak it. I will not allow that. And if I refuse, then you remain here, and 23 years becomes 30, 40, until you are simply a woman who folded laundry and died without ever asking why. The cruelty of truth was that it did not need to be loud. Kiera looked at the altar, at the crucifix hanging crooked on the wall, at the dust settling in the candlelight. She thought of the girls sleeping 3 to a bed, of Mrs. Slane's cold hands distributing bread like punishment, of every morning that had tasted the same. I accept, she said. Dominic nodded once. You have until dawn to gather your things. I will return with a carriage. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Miss Mann. Yes, Your Grace? Do not thank me. This will not be mercy, it will be war. The door closed behind him, and Kiera stood alone in the chapel where prayers went to die. She returned to the dormitory and opened the ledger kept by the doorway. There, in fresh ink, her name had been altered. Someone had crossed out Girl 23 and written Kiera Mann, Ward of Calderwin. Someone was already rewriting her. Hey, quick question, how are you feeling right now? Thank you so much for being here. It really means the world to me. I'm working toward 1,000 subscribers. And if this story is already pulling at your heart, please hit that subscribe button for Duke's Royal Library. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. All right, thank you. Dawn came with frost that made the windows look like they had been carved from bone. Kiera packed everything she owned into a cloth bundle. 2 dresses, a comb with missing teeth, and a book she had stolen 3 years ago and never returned. The other girls watched from their beds, silent as witnesses at a hanging. Mrs. Slane appeared in the doorway, her face arranged into something that might have been concern if you did not look too closely. You are certain of this choice, Miss Mann? She asked, and the title sounded like an accusation. I am. Dukes are not known for their generosity without expectation. Kiera met her eyes. Neither are orphanages. Mrs. Slane's smile thinned. Gratitude was never your strength. I had nothing to be grateful for. The silence that followed tasted like vinegar. A knock echoed from below. The carriage had arrived. Kiera descended the stairs for the last time, her boots clicking against stone that had been worn smooth by girls who never left. At the entrance, Dominic stood beside a polished black carriage, his posture as rigid as the iron gate behind him. He gestured toward the door. Miss Mann. She climbed inside, and the seat was softer than any bed she had ever known. Dominic settled across from her, and the door closed, with a sound like finality. The carriage lurched forward, and Street Catherine's orphanage began to shrink in the frost-covered glass. For the first few minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence behaved like something alive, breathing between them. Then Dominic reached into his coat and withdrew a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. He placed it on the seat beside her. What is this? Kiera asked. Boots. Yours are falling apart. She looked down at her feet, at the leather split along the seams, at the toes blackened by cold and damp. She had not realized how broken they were until someone noticed. I do not need charity, she said. It is not charity. It is practicality. You cannot walk into society with boots that announce your past before you open your mouth. Kiera unwrapped the parcel. The boots were plain, sturdy, new. She ran her fingers over the leather, and for a moment she forgot how to breathe. Why are you doing this? She asked. Because I gave my word to a dying man, and because I believe you deserve more than survival. You do not know me. No, Dominic agreed. She looked up sharply. You are a duke. And you think that means I have never been doubted? His tone remained calm, but there was an edge beneath it. Society measures worth by bloodline and coin. I was born with both. You were born with neither. That does not make you less intelligent. It makes you more dangerous. Kiera frowned. Dangerous? Because you have nothing to lose. And people with nothing to lose do not bend. The carriage turned onto a wider road, and through the window, Kiera saw fashionable houses rising like monuments to everything she had never touched. A carriage passed them, going the opposite direction, and inside, a woman with jewels in her hair stared at Kiera's face with the kind of interest that felt like a blade. Dominic noticed. That was Lady Cordelia Fairfax, cousin to the late Earl. She will be your loudest enemy. Why? Because you exist. And your existence makes her family look careless. Kiera leaned back against the seat. You are proof. There is a difference. The city gave way to estates with iron gates and manicured gardens. Eventually, the carriage slowed before a house that looked less like a home and more like a declaration. Stone columns, wide steps, windows that reflected the sky like mirrors. Welcome to Calderwin House, Dominic said. The staff stood in a line along the entrance, each one dressed in black and white, each one silent as the grave. At the front stood a woman with silver hair pulled tight enough to make her face look carved from marble. This is Mrs. Alice Brewster, the housekeeper, Dominic said. She will see to your immediate needs. Mrs. Brewster's gaze travelled over Kiera like an inventory. She noted the worn dress, the rough hands, the posture of someone who had spent years trying not to be seen. Her expression did not soften. Miss Mann, she said, her voice crisp. Your chamber is prepared. Dinner is at 7. You will be expected to present yourself appropriately. I do not have. Appropriate attire has been arranged. Kiera wanted to argue, but the words felt too heavy. Dominic stepped closer, his voice dropping. Tomorrow morning, library, 9 o'clock. Your education begins then. Education? You will learn the world that hid you, Miss Mann, and you will learn it well enough to survive it. He turned and walked into the house, leaving her standing at the threshold of a life she did not yet know how to live. That night, in a guest chamber larger than the entire dormitory at Street Catherine's, Kiera sat on the edge of a bed that felt like temptation. The fire burned too warm. The walls stood too far apart. Everything smelled clean, and it made her feel filthy by contrast. She heard footsteps in the corridor, voices too low to understand. Then a sentence that cut through the walls like glass. Lady Cordelia has already sent inquiries. The county moves fast when it smells illegitimacy. Kiera pressed her hands against her knees and reminded herself how to breathe. She had escaped one cage, but the bars of this one were gilded, and that made them harder to see. The next morning, a letter arrived on silver plate. Mrs. Brewster brought it to Kiera's chamber with an expression that suggested distaste. The envelope was cream-colored, sealed with perfumed wax. Inside, the handwriting looped like silk around a throat. Lady Cordelia Fairfax requests the pleasure of an introduction to the Duke's new charity. Kiera set the letter down, and her hands did not shake, but somewhere in the house, she heard the sound of paper being burned. The library smelled like old leather and decisions that had been made centuries ago. Kiera arrived at 9 o'clock exactly. Dominic stood beside a desk, covered in ledgers, contracts, and maps that looked like they had been drawn by men who believed the world could be divided into lines. Sit, he said. She sat. He did not begin with pleasantries. He began with a ledger, open to a page filled with numbers that made no sense until he explained them. This is the account for Grayford Hall, Dominic said. Rents collected from tenants, maintenance costs, staff wages. Your inheritance includes a portion of these revenues. Kiera leaned forward. How much? Enough to live independently. Not enough to be careless. He slid the ledger toward her. Read. She did. Slowly at first, tracing the columns with her finger, learning the language of income and expenditure. Then faster. Her eyes caught on a line near the bottom. Street, Catherine's Orphanage annual payment. This, she said, tapping the entry. This is not charity. No, this is payment for silence. Dominic's expression did not change, but she saw approval flicker behind his eyes. Correct. Kiera kept reading. Another entry caught her attention. Warehouse, Southwark quarterly rent. The amount seemed low compared to similar properties listed above it. This warehouse, she said. Why is the rent so much lower? Dominic paused. He leaned closer, reading the line she had marked. For a moment, neither of them spoke. You are right, he said quietly. Someone has been underpaying. Kiera looked up, and their eyes met across the desk. The distance between them felt smaller than it should. Your father kept meticulous records, Dominic continued, his voice steady again. Who? That is what we will find out. He pulled another document from the stack. Your mother's name was Mary Ellison. She worked at Grayford Hall as a governess. She was educated, intelligent, and she fell in love with a man who could not marry her without destroying his reputation. The words fell in love sounded wrong coming from Dominic's mouth. Too soft, too human. Did he love her? Kiera asked. I do not know. But he paid for your care, and before he died he wrote instructions that you were to be found and protected. That is not love, that is guilt. Dominic set the document down. Perhaps, but guilt with action is better than love with silence. Kiera hated that he was right. They worked through the morning, and she learned faster than either of them expected. She asked precise questions. She spotted inconsistencies. She wrote notes in the margins like someone preparing for battle. At one point, Dominic reached for a paper at the same moment she did. Their hands nearly touched. Both pulled back too quickly. The air between them changed, and neither acknowledged it. By noon, her head ached, but her pulse felt steadier. "Tomorrow," Dominic said as she stood to leave, "we begin contract law." "Why?" "Because you will need to know when someone is trying to cheat you. And Miss Mann, they will try." She turned at the door. "Your Grace." "Yes, thank you." He looked at her for a long moment, and something unreadable crossed his face. "Do not thank me yet." That afternoon, Mrs. Brewster summoned Kiera to the sitting room. Inside, 3 women waited, seamstresses with measuring tapes and fabric samples spread across every surface. "You will need proper attire," Mrs. Brewster said. "Lady Cordelia is hosting a winter gathering in 2 weeks. You will attend." Kiera's stomach dropped. "I would rather not." "Unfortunately, Miss Mann, society does not care what you would rather. You will attend, and you will be prepared." The seamstresses worked quickly, pinning fabric, marking hems, murmuring measurements in voices too low to hear. Kiera stood still as a post and tried not to think about how silk felt like a costume she did not know how to wear. That evening, a footman delivered correspondence to Dominic's study. Kiera passed by in the hallway and heard his voice, low and sharp. "Blackstone, I need the original file. Someone has already been tampering. Mr. Harold Blackstone, the solicitor." Kiera filed the name away like ammunition. Later, alone in her chamber, she found a folded note tucked inside the Earl's old correspondence that Dominic had given her to study. The handwriting was shaky, rushed. "Forgive me. She must never be claimed in public." The note was unsigned, but Kiera knew it had been written by her father. She read it 3 times, and each time, the word never felt heavier. Somewhere in the house, a door closed, and outside, frost began to gather on the windows like judgment that refused to melt. The invitation arrived on cream-colored paper that smelled faintly of roses and threat. "Lady Cordelia Fairfax requests the honor of your presence at a winter gathering in celebration of charity and Christian virtue." Mrs. Brewster read it aloud with the kind of disdain usually reserved for spoiled meat. "Charity," she muttered. "She means spectacle." Kiera stood by the window, watching carriages pass on the street below. "I do not have to go." "You do," Dominic said from the doorway. She had not heard him enter. Refusing would confirm their suspicions. "You must show them you are not afraid." "I am afraid." "Good. Fear will keep you sharp." Over the next 2 weeks, Mrs. Brewster drilled Kiera in etiquette, like a general preparing for siege. How to hold a teacup, how to curtsy without looking servile, how to smile in a way that revealed nothing. "Never apologize for your birth, Mrs. Brewster said one afternoon, her tone uncharacteristically gentle. "Apologizing gives them permission to pity you, and pity is just cruelty wearing a kinder mask." The night of the gathering arrived too quickly. Kiera descended the stairs in a gown the color of deep blue twilight, and for the first time in her life, she looked like something other than a mistake. Dominic waited at the bottom, dressed in black, his expression unreadable. "You look well," he said. "I look like someone I am not." "No, you look like someone you are becoming." The carriage ride felt too short. When they arrived at Lady Cordelia's estate, the windows blazed with candlelight, and music spilled into the cold night air like laughter that had forgotten kindness. Inside, the ballroom shimmered. Chandeliers dripped crystal. Women wore jewels that could have fed street Catherines for a year. Men spoke in voices that assumed the world would listen, and every single person turned to stare when Kiera entered on Dominic's arm. Lady Cordelia swept forward, her gown a confection of silver and ice. She was beautiful in the way a blade is beautiful. Sharp, cold, made for cutting. "Your Grace," she said, her smile wide and false. "How generous of you to bring your guest." "Miss Kiera Mann," Dominic said evenly, "daughter of the late Lord Benedict Hawthorne." The room inhaled as one. Lady Cordelia's smile did not waver. How brave of you to wear silk, Miss Mann. It suits you better than I would have imagined. The insult was wrapped in sweetness, but Kiera heard it clearly. You do not belong here. Thank you, Lady Cordelia, Kiera replied. Your estate is lovely. I imagine it requires significant income to maintain. Cordelia's eyes narrowed. Indeed. Then you understand the importance of accurate ledgers and honest contract terms. The comment landed like a stone in still water. Cordelia's smile tightened. A man approached from the side, tall and smug, with a face that suggested he had never been told no. Tobias Greymere, he introduced himself. I hear you've risen quickly, Miss Mann, from Orphanage to Duke's Ward. Quite the climb. I did not climb, Kiera said. I was retrieved, Tobias laughed, but the sound held no warmth. Careful, Miss Mann. Society does not forgive those who reach above their station, and yet it forgives those who steal from it daily, Kiera replied. Curious, is it not? Dominic's hand found the small of her back, steadying. The gesture was subtle, but everyone noticed. Another man joined them, older, sharper, Lionel Thornwick. His gaze moved between Kiera and Dominic, with the kind of interest that felt like suspicion. Your Grace, Lionel said slowly. Forgive my frankness, but tongues are already wagging. A duke taking on the guardianship of an illegitimate orphan. It invites speculation. Then let them speculate, Dominic said, his voice colder than the frost outside. I am not in the business of managing rumors. But you are in the business of reputation, Lionel countered. And reputations, once tarnished, are nearly impossible to restore. Kiera felt the weight of every eye in the room pressing against her skin. She wanted to disappear, to fold herself small again, to return to the orphanage where at least the cruelty was honest. But Mrs. Brewster's voice echoed in her mind. Never apologize for your birth. So she lifted her chin and met Lionel's gaze. My mother deserved better than whispers. And if my presence here makes you uncomfortable, Mr. Thornwick, perhaps you should examine why. The room went silent. Lionel's face reddened. Tobias looked delighted. Lady Cordelia's expression could have cut glass, and Dominic's hand remained steady at her back. Later, as the musicians played and couples danced, Kiera stood near the window, trying to breathe. Dominic appeared beside her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. You did well, he said. I made enemies. You already had enemies, now they know you can fight. She accepted the glass but did not drink. They think I am lying about my parentage. Let them think it. The truth will come. And if it does not? Dominic turned to face her fully, and the candlelight made his eyes look almost warm. Then we make our own truth. The music swelled. Cordelia's laughter echoed from across the room. And somewhere in the crowd, a man whispered to his companion, loud enough to be heard. Mark my words. The Duke's charity will end badly. It always does. Kiera set her glass down and walked toward the exit. Dominic followed. Outside, the cold air felt like relief. In the carriage, neither of them spoke until they were halfway home. Then, Kiera said quietly, They will try, Dominic replied. But you are not as fragile as they believe. How do you know? Because fragile women do not survive 23 years in places like Street Catherine's. The carriage rolled through streets slicked with frost, and Kiera closed her eyes. She thought of Mary Ellison, her mother, who had loved a man society would never let her keep, who had given birth in shame and died without seeing her daughter's face. She would not let that story be the only one told. 2 days later, a pamphlet appeared on street corners across London. The title screamed in bold ink, The Duke's Orphan Pet, Scandal or Charity. Inside, it hinted at impropriety, suggested purchased loyalty, and painted Kiera as a woman willing to do anything for comfort. Mrs. Brewster brought it to Dominic's study and set it on his desk like evidence of murder. They are moving faster than expected, she said. Dominic read the pamphlet in silence. His jaw tightened, but his hands remained steady. Who wrote this? Kiera asked from the doorway. Someone who profits from scandal, Dominic replied. And someone who had access to information that should have remained sealed. Kiera stepped closer. Mrs. Slane, most likely. Rage rose in Kiera's chest, hot and sharp. She sold my baptism papers. And your mother's deathbed confession. The room tilted. Kiera gripped the edge of the desk. What confession? Dominic hesitated. And that hesitation told her everything. Tell me, she demanded. He opened a drawer and withdrew a second document. A letter written in fading ink. Mary Ellison's handwriting. I loved him. God forgive me. I loved him. But he could not love me in return. Not publicly. So I gave him the only gift I could. Silence. Let my daughter live quietly. Let her never know the shame of being claimed. Kiera's hands trembled as she read. Her mother had chosen invisibility, had believed it was kindness. She was wrong, Kiera whispered. Yes, Dominic said. She was. You've come this far with Kiera and Dominic. Don't abandon them at the moment it becomes dangerous. Subscribe to Duke's Royal Library, or at least leave a like. It tells me you want stories where love is earned, not handed out. The pamphlet spread like a disease. Within days, every drawing room in London had a copy. Servants whispered. Merchants smirked. Even the clergy spoke of scandal in hushed, delighted tones. Street Catherine's orphanage became a punchline. Newspapers called it a den of secrets. The girls inside suffered questions they could not answer, cruelty they had not earned, and Kiera knew it was her fault. She stood in Dominic's library, staring at the fire, and felt the weight of every life her existence had touched. I should return to the orphanage, apologize, make them see I did not ask for this. They will not see you, Dominic said from behind his desk. They will see what the pamphlet taught them to see. Then what do? You survive it. And you do not give them the satisfaction of watching you break. But breaking felt easier than standing. That afternoon, Dominic's carriage was followed through the city. A group of men on horseback kept pace, their faces hidden by scarves, their intent clear. At one intersection, a stone struck the side of the carriage hard enough to crack the wood. The driver cursed, the horses reared, Dominic shouted for control, and Kiera braced herself against the seat as the carriage lurched sideways. For a moment, she thought they would tip, thought the wheels would splinter and the street would swallow them whole. But Dominic pulled the reins himself, steadying the horses with hands that did not shake. When they returned to Calderwin House, Dominic's coat was torn and his knuckles were scraped. They wanted to scare you, Kiera said. They wanted to scare you, Dominic corrected. I am simply in the way. That night, Kiera made a decision. She dressed in her plainest gown, tied her hair back, and walked to the stables. A driver tried to stop her, but she ignored him. She would not hide while others bled for her mistakes. She returned to Street Catherine's alone. The orphanage looked smaller than she remembered. The gate hung crooked. The windows were dark except for a single lamp burning in the office. Mrs. Slane sat at her desk, counting coins. Kiera stepped inside without knocking. Slane looked up, and for a moment, something like fear crossed her face. Then it hardened into righteousness. Miss Mann, she said, come to beg forgiveness. I came to ask why. Why? Slane laughed, sharp and bitter. Because I spent 40 years feeding girls who would never thank me. Because I scraped by on charity that arrived late and left early. And because you, with your fine duke and your inheritance, reminded me every day that some girls are worth saving and others are not. Kiera stepped closer. So you sold me. I sold a story, one you were foolish enough to make true. You hurt the other girls. They did nothing. Slane's smile was cruel. Then they will learn what I learned. The world does not care about nothing, girls. Kiera wanted to scream, to overturn the desk, to make Slane feel every cold night, every empty stomach, every year spent believing she deserved nothing. But she did not. Instead, she said quietly, you were right about one thing, Mrs. Slane. The world does not care. But I will. She turned and walked out, leaving Slane alone with her coins. When Kiera returned to Calderwin House, Dominic was waiting in the entrance hall. His face was pale, his posture rigid. You left without telling me. I do not need permission. You need protection. I need to stop being afraid. The silence between them felt like something breakable. Then Dominic crossed the space in 3 strides and stopped inches from her. His voice dropped. You think I do not see you? You think I do not notice every time you straighten your spine, every time you refuse to bow, every time you choose dignity over safety? Kiera's breath caught. Your Grace, I think of you when I should not, he said, and the words sounded like confession. I think of you in the library, in the corridors, at night when the house is silent, and I tell myself I am a fool. Her pulse hammered. You are my guardian. I know. Society already believes the worst. I know. Then why are you saying this? Because I am tired of pretending I do not want you. The kiss was not gentle. It was restrained fire, years of discipline, fracturing under the weight of something neither of them had permission to feel. His hands framed her face, her fingers gripped his coat. The world narrowed to breath and heat, and the terrible knowledge that this would ruin them both. When he pulled away, his expression looked pained. "I should not have done that," he said. "No. If I keep my authority over your fortune, they will say you had no choice." Kiera's chest felt tight. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I will remove myself as your guardian. Mr. Blackstone will oversee your inheritance. You will be free." "Free of you? Free to choose." She wanted to argue, to demand he stay, to tell him that freedom without him felt like another kind of cage. But instead, she nodded, because he was right, and because love that required captivity was not love at all. Mr. Harold Blackstone arrived 3 days later with a leather case and an expression that suggested he trusted no one, least of all dukes with guilty consciences. He was a man in his 50s, thin as a whip, with eyes that missed nothing. He studied Kiera the way one studies a contract, looking for loopholes, weaknesses, places where the language might betray intent. "Miss Mann," he said, "I understand you wish to assume independent control of your inheritance." "I do. And you understand the risks. Society will call you reckless. Men will attempt to cheat you. Women will whisper that you have no idea what you are doing. They already whisper that." Blackstone's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Good. Then you are prepared." He spread documents across the desk, and Dominic stood near the window, silent as a ghost. "Your inheritance includes 3 properties," Blackstone explained. "Grayford Hall, a warehouse in Southwark, and a cottage in Kent. The rents total approximately £800 per annum. Managed wisely, you will live comfortably. Managed poorly, you will be destitute within 5 years." "I will not be destitute." "Prove it." For the next 2 hours, Kiera answered questions about tenancy law, contract disputes, investment risk. Blackstone did not soften his interrogation. He pushed until she faltered, then pushed harder, but she did not break. Finally, Blackstone leaned back and nodded. "You will do." He turned to Dominic. "Your Grace, if you would sign here, relinquishing guardianship and transferring oversight to my office." Dominic stepped forward. His hand hovered over the document for a moment, and Kiera saw something flicker in his expression. Regret, relief, something nameless. Then he signed, the ink dried, and Kiera became her own. That evening, she packed her things. Mrs. Brewster helped in silence, folding gowns with the care of someone saying goodbye. "You do not have to leave," Mrs. Brewster said quietly. "Yes, I do. He cares for you. I know. But if I stay, I will never know if I chose him or if I simply had nowhere else to go." Mrs. Brewster nodded. "Then go. And do not come back until you are certain." Kiera left Calderwin House at dawn, and Dominic did not appear to say goodbye. She told herself it was better this way. She did not believe it. For 2 weeks, Kiera lived in a modest rented room near Cheapside. She met with tenants, reviewed contracts, learned the weight of decisions that could make or ruin lives. Society punished her swiftly. Invitations stopped. Shopkeepers refused her custom. Women crossed the street to avoid her. Lady Cordelia sent a note. "Some stains cannot be washed out, no matter how much silk you wear." But Kiera did not bend. Instead, she made a choice. She would go to Grayford Hall, the estate her father had left her, the place where secrets had been buried, and she would dig them up. The journey took a full day. When she arrived, the hall stood against the grey sky, like something out of a ghost story. The windows were dark, the gardens overgrown. The gate hung open, as if it had given up. Inside, dust covered everything. Furniture draped in cloth, portraits staring from walls like judges. Kiera found the study on the 2nd floor. The desk was locked, but she forced it open with a letter opener. Inside, ledgers, correspondence, and a journal bound in worn leather. She opened it. The handwriting belonged to her father. "If I speak her name, they will kill me." The sentence repeated across pages, growing more frantic, more afraid. "Alaric knows. He has always known. He forged the letters. He paid the men. He wants the estate, and he will bury anyone who stands in his way." Kiera's hands trembled. "Alaric Whitmire, the Earl's nephew." She kept reading. "I tried to protect her. I tried to acknowledge her. But Alaric threatened to expose Mary as a woman of loose morals, to destroy Kiera's name before she could claim it. So I stayed silent, and silence poisoned me. The last entry was dated 3 days before his death. I am dying. Not from illness, from a gift Alaric brought me. Port wine, he said. I know better now. Forgive me, Mary. Forgive me, Kiera. I was a coward. Kiera closed the journal and pressed her palms against the desk. Her father had been murdered. And the man who killed him was still free. Outside, footsteps crunched on gravel. Kiera looked out the window and saw a man in a dark coat standing near the gate, watching the house. She was not alone. Kiera did not sleep that night. She sat in the study with the journal open, memorizing every word, every date, every piece of evidence that could bring Alaric Whitmire to justice. By dawn, she had a plan. She returned to London and went directly to Blackstone's office. She placed the journal on his desk and said, "I need your help." Blackstone read in silence. When he finished, his face was grim. "This is enough to arrest him, but it will also destroy what remains of the Grayford name. The Grayford name destroyed my mother. I do not care what happens to it now." Blackstone nodded slowly. "Then we move carefully. Alaric is well connected. If we accuse him publicly and fail to prove it, he will bury you. I am already buried. Now I am digging my way out." They spent the next 3 days building the case. Blackstone found witnesses, servants who had seen Alaric visit the Earl in his final days, a wine merchant who remembered selling port at Alaric's request, a forger who had been paid to alter correspondence, the evidence stacked like stones. Finally, Blackstone arranged a formal gathering. Not a trial, but close enough. Alaric would be confronted before a magistrate, witnesses, and members of the peerage who had known the Earl. Kiera was summoned as the primary witness. She dressed in black, as if attending a funeral. Perhaps she was. The gathering took place in a London assembly room. Alaric sat at the front, composed, confident. He smiled when Kiera entered, as if she were a child playing dress-up. Lady Cordelia sat in the gallery, her expression unreadable. The magistrate called the room to order. Blackstone presented the journal. The entries were read aloud. Alaric's smile faded. "This is fantasy," Alaric said smoothly. "A dying man's delusions." "Then explain the witnesses," Blackstone replied. One by one, they testified. The wine merchant, the forger, a maid who had overheard Alaric threaten the Earl. Alaric's composure cracked. "This is absurd. I am being accused by an orphan who has no proof of her own lineage." Kiera stood. "I have proof of yours. You forged letters to silence my mother. You poisoned my father. And you profited from his death. You are lying. Then let the magistrate decide." The room held its breath. Alaric lunged toward the exit, but 2 guards blocked his path. He turned, wild-eyed, and grabbed a stack of papers from the table, tearing them apart. "You will not take this from me," he shouted. "I earned it. You stole it," Kiera said quietly. The guards restrained him. He was dragged from the room, still shouting, still denying. Lady Cordelia rose from her seat. For a moment, she looked directly at Kiera. Then she turned and walked out without a word. The magistrate ruled in favor of an arrest. Alaric Whitmire would stand trial for murder. Kiera walked out into the cold afternoon air and felt nothing but exhaustion. But it was not over. 2 weeks later, Dominic appeared at her door. She had not seen him since the day she left Calderwyn House. He looked older, tired, but his eyes still held that stormwater grey that had once made her believe in impossible things. "Miss Mann," he said. "Your Grace, may I come in?" She stepped aside. They stood in the small sitting room, and the silence between them felt like years. "I read about the trial," Dominic said. "You were right. About all of it. I know. And you did it without me. I had to." He nodded slowly. "I understand. And I am proud of you." The words should have felt like victory. Instead, they felt like goodbye. "Why are you here?" Kiera asked. Dominic crossed the room until he stood directly in front of her. "Because I have spent 2 months pretending I could live without you. And I cannot." Her breath caught. "I am not your guardian," he continued. "I have no power over your fortune. I have no claim to your future. But I am asking, as a man who has loved you since the moment you defied me in that library, if you would consider—" "Yes," Kiera said. He blinked. "I have not finished asking. You do not need to." "Kiera, She kissed him. Not with the desperation of their first kiss, but with certainty, with choice. When they pulled apart, Dominic smiled, actually smiled. "Society will call this scandalous," he said. Let them. They will say you married me for security. I do not need security. I have my own. Then why? Because I do not need you, Dominic. And that is why I may choose you. They married quietly in a chapel outside London. No grand ceremony, no society guests, just vows spoken before witnesses who mattered. Kiera wore blue, Dominic wore black, and the bells were muted by snow. Afterward, they returned to Calderwin House, and Kiera made an announcement. Street Catherine's orphanage would be rebuilt, not as a place of punishment, but as a school where girls would learn to read, to manage accounts, to speak without apology. Mrs. Brewster agreed to oversee it. Mrs. Slane was quietly dismissed. The girls would have light. They would have books. They would have names that mattered. 6 months later, Kiera received an unsigned letter. Inside, a single sentence. There are others like you, and someone is still buying silence. She showed it to Dominic. He looked at her, and she saw the same thing reflected in his eyes that she felt in her chest. Purpose. Then we find them, he said. Yes. Outside, snow began to fall again. London spread below them, vast and cold, and full of secrets waiting to be spoken. But Kiera Mann was no longer afraid of the dark. She had learned to carry her own light. If you watched all the way to this point, and you still haven't subscribed to Duke's Royal Library, that is basically letting society win. Tap subscribe, hit like, and comment Greyford if you want the next scandal even darker. Snow does not ask permission before it covers a city. It simply falls, quiet and certain, until even the dirtiest street looks clean for a moment. That is what Kiera Mann became. Not an ornament in a duke's house, not a pity story told over tea, but a woman who learned the language of power, then used it to carve light into the places that raised her in shadow. And yet, propriety is a patient monster. It forgets nothing. It forgives less. Somewhere in London, another sealed envelope is already being pressed into wax. Another name is being hidden. Another fortune is being arranged like a confession that arrives too late. So if you felt the chill of this story, if you tasted the scandal under the sweetness, then you already know what awaits in our next tale. Thank you for staying to the very end. Truly. Bye.